Welcome from the Office for Education Policy. We're back with a short video on the Atlas system, and this video is timely in that many schools and districts are finishing up the second interim, the winter interim, and we just want a chance to talk a little bit about how those are intended to be used to understand students' progress. These interims were built with a very specific purpose, and that purpose informs the design. And in this case, the purpose is to help you look at students' progress from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, and then finally, when we finish the summative this year, to the end of the year. And this design is intentional to inform how well students are gaining in their ability to demonstrate mastery over grade level standards. As always, the portal is where you're going to go, and there you're going to find different types of resources, but I'm going to drill into the reporting piece. So a quick recap, these interims have been designed to help you assess how well your students are developing and progressing in their ability to demonstrate mastery of grade level standards during the year. That's an important word there. The interims include items from the full blueprint of the test, so they're like a mini summative, which means that we do expect that as students are learning over the course of the year, that they're going to be increasing in their ability to demonstrate, and then therefore their scores will be increasing. And as always, because these interims are based on the full blueprint and the summative is based on end of year expectations, you should be adjusting your expectations based on when you give the interim and which standards you expect your students to have learned at that point in time. This school year was a bit of a different school year because of standard setting and having to set the performance levels. Next year, the interims are going to be open earlier and longer, so you might actually be thinking about this in terms of the information you're getting now versus given these wide windows starting with August 1st of the next school year, the 2026 school year, all the way through December 31st. You will have an opportunity to really decide how you want to use these to best serve the needs of your students in your school. For example, if you wanted to get a sense of just the pretest sense of your current roster of students' strengths and weaknesses at the very beginning, you could give the interim early in the school year as a pretest of sorts on the grade level standards that they are expected to know and be able to do by the end of the year. And you could then plan learning from there. You could also wait a little longer to get some instruction in grade level standards and use those results to get a sense of the level at which your students are mastering those standards and where you might go deeper. So you're going to have options, and it's important to think about timing and how that timing impacts the use of these interim assessments and the results that come from them. By now, you are probably used to going into the system and able to pull information as you need it. I pulled this screenshot for a particular reason. You can see that I've selected the interims in the summative. Some of you gave end of course exams in December, and if you did, then that information is actually also provided, so you can review that as well. We're going to focus on the interim though and talk a little bit more about its intended use. For today, I'm going to dig into a district view of fourth grade math. There are caveats when you're looking at this from a district view. You have to interpret based on what you know students have had an opportunity to learn. And at the district level, you may not necessarily know that to the extent that a building principal or a classroom teacher will know. So based on how you know students are completing the assessment in terms of the number of assessments completed, do you have full results yet? Are students doing similar material across the schools? I would just be careful not to draw giant inferences about differences among schools without knowing if there are expected variations among your schools because of curriculum, pace, other factors in terms of when they're actually completing all the testing for their school. So keep those things in mind. I know I am repeating myself, but remember the caveats. There are different classrooms, and they may have offered different opportunities to learn in the standards within the reporting categories. So when you open up that information by school, you can see just from this particular illustration that School A is looking at different things than School B or C. So in the example that I've pulled here, you've got School A where students still are not proficient on several of the standards, but in School B, they are. That could be the students, right? Because we don't randomly assign students to the classroom. So School A may have more challenges that they're working with, and we know that those impact achievement. We also know that sometimes schools do things in different orders. And so before jumping to conclusions, think about those contexts and make sure you understand the context for what is expected at this point in time in the year. The interim results should always be interpreted based on that local contextual information, the standards that have been taught, any prior demonstrations of mastery, what you know about what is going on within those particular classrooms. If your classes aren't randomly assigned, as I mentioned, then you may have more students who are ahead, you may have more students who are behind, and this shows up differently. You would want to know more before making any snap judgments. One of the things that I'm very fond of is digging deeper because there's better information that is useful at the classroom level rather than trying to force interpretations at this bigger school level, particularly with the interims. So in the case of Interim 2, this may show up as different progress on different standards. This report helps you understand where the students are on those standards within each school. And then at the school level and the classroom level, the folks there are better equipped to understand whether or not this should be of concern, whether or not this is expected. There's another report that's available once you have these interims going, and that is a longitudinal report. You can click on the features and tools and get more insights by building a longitudinal report. When you click on Build Longitudinal Report, it'll ask you, do you want to bring in just the interim or do you want to bring in the interim and the summative? And I'm going to show you the interim and summative because I want to point out some important things there. So in this case, I've just brought in the two interims, even though I said a minute ago I wouldn't. The bar charts at the top help give a quick visual for interpretation of progress. You want to see more green and yellow compared to red between the first interim on the left and the second interim on the right. This chart over here that gives the 2 points in time, you have to be careful because that scale is rather small, and so it looks like a giant increase. We want to take a look at whether or not that increase is meaningful by looking at the actual score and its margin of error at both points in time. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And you can tell if your group is progressing in a significant way by looking at that margin of error around the scores for Interim 1 and Interim 2. Those are mean scores or average scores, so they do have a margin of error. For example, in the fall, the score for the group was 1,044 and fell in a margin of error between 1,042 and 1,046. In the winter interim, Interim 2, the score is 1,049 with a margin of error between 1,046 to 1,052. Since our top margin of error, the 1,046 for Interim 1, and the bottom of our margin of error for Interim 2, since those overlap, we really don't have a significant increase, even though this chart makes it look that way. I can't caution enough that you always have to look at your scales and then use the margin of error information to compare the two scores. Oftentimes, scales will auto-adjust in various applications, and so it puts the onus on us as professionals to try to interpret that information in a meaningful way, and that's by using that margin of error. Then you might also look at each of the reporting categories to see where students are and are not making progress. And in this example, the progress in number and place value is really not significant, whereas there is some progress going on in computation and algebraic reasoning, and also in geometry and measurement and data analysis. So I would be looking at where are my students not getting what they need in terms of what's expected of them in the standards for number and place value. So this is a really neat report that you can get some quick visuals on, but then also try not to overreact to this particular visual right here. Make sure you're interpreting based on the difference between the scale score average at interim 1 and the scale score average at interim 2. And I put a few more examples up here because no two schools do look alike, but this darn chart just keeps making it look like a really meaningful jump. So again, I caution you to use those margin of error, use your data and your professional judgment to prioritize the learning for your students. This is the end of the winter interim, and so the amount of time you have for what you want students to learn is more limited. So these data can help you with those, setting those priorities. I isolated this statement on purpose. The classroom level is where you will know the most about students' opportunity to learn the standards, the depth at which they are getting that opportunity to demonstrate mastery, and whether or not you have expectations of a certain set of standards being mastered at this point in time. This information at that local level is what will serve you well when you go to interpret the results. And it is intended to be used to guide your next steps as the data help you form your professional judgment about what is needed next. So there's limited student level information in this view. I'm just going to say that because there's another view I want to show you next. I know teachers don't have all the time in the world to do data work, right? Because if you are spending tons of time, then you don't have all that time for instruction. So a student's individual student report, the detailed versions, can provide you with some very interesting information that may resonate with you because of what you know about your students. Let's take a look at this. There is this report that provides the trend over time and specific information for the reporting category performance for each of your students. What I like about this view that I feel isn't as present in that oversimplified view is that you get this sense of how the student is changing over time. So in this case, I've got the 3 different test opportunities. I have at the very left, on the left-hand side, the very left bar is the student and their level at the end of 2024, so the prior year. And then you have the 2 interims for the current year, 2025. And you'll see that typically students will score higher at the end of the year than they do at the beginning of the next year, because this represents a whole new grade level of standards. Prior year standards, current year standards. And then you can get a sense of whether or not they're progressing on the current year standards by looking at their information from interim 1 to interim 2. The other information that I do like a lot is these little starfighters. They're your confidence bands around the student's category, reporting category score. To me, if you're not sure about a student, you have a couple of options. You can take a look at these and you can say, okay, this student is knocking out of the park on number and place value, but we've probably got some work to do here in terms of computation and algebraic reasoning. So it can help you narrow that down. This is going to differ from student to student. This is one place where you can say, I'm not sure exactly what in algebraic reasoning or computation, what the problem is. So I'm going to go and pull some of my own assessments around this set of standards, or I'm going to build something in the classroom tool, and I'm going to get a better sense of where the student is struggling. This information does not uncover student thinking. It doesn't help you to understand where the learning issues are. It just alerts you that this is an area that is not as strong. And then that should lead you to deeper action in terms of more formative assessment for the learning in the classroom. I do want to reinforce the idea that student progress can look very different. Some students actually, here's this student's prior year, and they were in level 1, but then something happened over the summer. And this student is now almost at grade level for the next level of standards. Or an alternate explanation could be that the student is repeating a grade level and is just in a better place for learning developmentally than they were the year before. But this is very different from what we see most of the time, which is the summative is higher than the initial interim for the next grade level, and then we should see some progress between these two. And you can see that over here as well. And some of you are probably asking how much progress is enough progress, and that is really going to differ from student to student. You can use their scaled score on interim 1 and set a goal for that student based on scoring higher than the top of their error band on interim 2, at least higher. Knowing the student, you're in a better position to decide how much of a stretch goal you want to set. In future years, we'll start to have data that will help us to understand at each grade level and within each subject how much do students typically progress on the scale between interim 1, interim 2, and the summative assessment. But for now, you can set goals with students based on making progress on their own score, because it's all on the same scale. It's on the same set of standards from interim 1 to interim 2 to the end of the year expectations on the summative. So that's something to keep in mind. Priorities for students should differ, and classroom teachers are in the best position to determine this based on their knowledge of the student and the more detailed information that you can glean from assessing and in the midst of instruction and on the fly. I will always encourage you to connect to the PLDs. I understand that DESE is referring to these as ALDs. PLD stands for Performance Level Descriptor. ALD stands for Achievement Level Descriptor. They get used interchangeably in a lot of states. So these are the documents that tell you examples of what it looks like when a student is demonstrating a standard at a level 1, at a level 2, at a level 3, and at a level 4. As a former teacher, this information would be so helpful to me in trying to figure out what's missing. If I have a student who's struggling in a particular area, in a particular reporting category, I might look at these different pieces and really think about, are my instructional activities, the way that I expect students to engage in their learning, are they more aligned with where I want them to be, which is a level 3 or 4? Or are they more aligned with a simpler level, a less strong or deep or complex level? So these are going to be where you're going to get a lot of information about what the expectations are for your students in terms of these standards and operationalizing them in your teaching and your students' learning. Again, I can't ignore the resource slide, so here it is. And finally, we are working on a parent part 2. And we are also looking at how we can be helpful in bringing you some information about some questions and concerns we've had about the test and how to make the most of it. Also, some questions we've had about student level growth, classroom level growth, and how do I know how much growth is enough? So stay tuned. We're going to be coming forward with a couple new videos in the near future on those topics.